The first time it happened, I thought I was imagining things. I had ordered a set of gardening tools, a small bookshelf, and a new wireless speaker. The delivery notifications pinged cheerfully on my phone, telling me they had been dropped off at my doorstep. I hurried outside only to find nothing. The box was gone. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I'd absent-mindedly moved it to the garage or left it on the back porch. But the next week, when a package of expensive skincare arrived and disappeared in the same exact way, the déjà vu was unmistakable. That's when I noticed her. Marjorie, HOA president, self-appointed neighborhood watch, and apparently a certified package thief. She was standing by her pristine mailbox, sipping iced tea, waving to a neighbor as if nothing had happened. I decided to confront her the next morning. I caught her just as she was leaving her house in her trademark beige cardigan, pearl earrings glinting in the sunlight. "Hi, Marjorie," I said, trying to sound casual though my stomach churned. "Did you happen to see a box on my porch yesterday?" She paused mid-step, squinting at me with a faint, practiced frown. "Oh dear, I wouldn't touch someone else's package. That would be improper." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but it carried a weight that screamed denial in full costume. "Funny," I muttered, keeping my tone light but pointed, "because I saw you walking past with a very large box the day it disappeared." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "I think you must be mistaken. Maybe the mailman delivered it to the wrong house. Happens all the time." I laughed, but it was more nervous than anything. "Yeah, maybe. Or maybe not." I walked back to my house feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. How does someone escalate from petty theft to full-blown HOA tyranny without anyone noticing? And more importantly, how do you fight back without ending up on a neighborhood gossip reel? That night I made a plan. I wasn't going to just report her. This was about more than the packages. This was about sending a message. Something unforgettable. Something that would finally make Marjorie think twice before treating my front porch like her personal Amazon warehouse. I grinned to myself as I opened my laptop. There was only one solution. Only one way to make a Karen like her pay. And it involved bees. The next morning I started researching. Not the kind of research you do for work or school. This was deep, borderline obsessive plotting. I needed something that was legal but painfully effective. Something that would make Marjorie regret ever setting foot near my porch. That's when I found it, live bee delivery. A box of bees, harmless if handled correctly, but terrifying if dropped unannounced on someone's stoop. I ordered them immediately, opting for the beginner-friendly hive with clear instructions. The thought of Marjorie shrieking in pearls and cashmere made me feel oddly satisfied. But I had to be careful. The HOA rules were strict about causing disturbances, and I didn't want a cease and desist slapped on my door before the fun even began. The day the bees arrived, I timed it perfectly. Marjorie was out gardening. She had that signature wide-brimmed hat and gloves. Ensemble that screamed, "I'm about to yell at someone." I tucked the box behind a bush near her driveway, making sure it was visible but not suspicious from the street. Hours passed and I watched from my window, my heart hammering with anticipation. Then I saw her. She came strolling down the path, humming an annoying little tune, clipboard in hand. Her eyes landed on the box. "Oh, what's this?" she muttered, adjusting her glasses. She leaned down, nose practically touching the bee's little container. I could barely breathe through the tension. The sound of buzzing started faint, then louder. She froze. "What on earth?" Her voice cracked mid-word. She stepped back, eyes wide, and I swear the pearls almost popped off her cardigan. "Bees?" She jumped, backing away, arms flailing. I tried not to laugh out loud, biting my knuckles instead. Her reaction was pure cinematic gold. The poised, controlling HOA president reduced to a panicked mess in her own driveway. I kept my distance, making sure to stay inside the safety of my house. The buzzing grew louder, her shouts more frantic. And then, the perfect, inevitable chaos. Marjorie tripped over the garden hose I'd intentionally left coiled near the flower bed. The box toppled, bees spilling into the air. She screamed, running in circles, swatting at the sky like she was trying to swat away an invisible army of tiny ninjas. Neighbors started peeking over fences. Some were trying not to laugh, others were recording, and there I was, perched at my window, heart racing, adrenaline flooding my veins, realizing that the tables had finally turned. But just as I started to feel victorious, I heard a distant sound that froze me. A high-pitched, shrill whistle coming from the HOA president's walkie-talkie. She was calling backup. The whistle cut through the afternoon like a gunshot. For a second, the world narrowed to the sound of it. That sharp, controlling note. And then everything I'd been savoring unraveled. Neighbors' heads snapped up, phones lifted. A dozen eyes found Marjorie as if she were an island in the sea of suburban calm. Her walkie-talkie barked again. Board members, aid requested at 14 Birch Lane. Package disturbance, possible stings. My stomach dropped. I had wanted humiliation, not an incident report. By the time I opened my door, the cul-de-sac had become a small circus. Kids on scooters peeking around hedges, two men in polo shirts who looked uncomfortably like HOA enforcers, and Mrs. Delgado from across the street clutching her terrarium like a shield. Marjorie stood at the center of it all, red-faced, her pearls askew, waving wildly as if conducting a disastrous orchestra. A couple of bees still clung to the air above her shoulder. She slapped at them like a woman trying to erase a bad memory. Someone call the... She started, and then saw me. Her expression was a textbook morph from panic to righteous fury. "You!" she shrieked. "You set those bees loose. You put our neighbors at risk." I felt my cleverness curdle into something colder. "I didn't," I began, then stopped. It wasn't an outright lie. I hadn't anticipated how quickly things could escalate. The legal risk. The chance someone could be hurt. The pleasant little victory in my head suddenly looked like a headline. An ambulance siren murmured in the distance and then grew closer. A paramedic knelt beside Marjorie, checking her wrist and forehead. She was shaky but breathing. "Allergic reaction?" the paramedic asked. Marjorie laughed hysterically. "No, not allergic, just traumatized," she said as if that made it smaller. The HOA men circled me politely and then not. "We need your name for the incident report," one of them said. His clipboard felt heavier than it should. I gave it, I signed. My handwriting looked like a confession. Someone snapped a photo of my signature and sent it into the cloud before my pen was dry. That evening my inbox was a war zone. 3 text messages from neighbors demanding explanations. A voicemail from an anxious tenant down the block who'd been stung once and wanted to know if I had a permit for whatever I'd done. The HOA sent a terse email. "Urgent disturbance re. 14. Birch Lane. Board meeting scheduled." Attached, a formal complaint form and a stern list of bylaws about public nuisances and unapproved biological materials. My chest tightened. Biological materials? The word made the bees I'd imagined as poetic come painfully bureaucratic. I tried to sleep and failed. The adrenaline had settled into a low, guilty hum. I kept replaying the afternoon. Marjorie's shriek, the buzzing swarm that had felt for a moment like justice. Somewhere in me, the triumph still pulsed, but it was now braided with dread. Before dawn, a knock at my door. I opened it to an officer with a polite, apologetic face I'd seen in TV shows when a neighbor's prank turned sideways. "Ma'am," he said, "we've had complaints. We need to ask you a few questions." He held a thin white envelope up like a badge. I recognized the HOA letterhead on it even before he spoke. My name was on the front and in the center, in bold, 3 words that made my throat go dry. Formal violation notice. The envelope felt heavier than a brick. I set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it as if it might magically dissolve. Inside was the formal notice. Citations for endangering neighbors. Unauthorized. Use of live animals on property. And creating a public nuisance. There were fines, deadlines, and a polite yet venomous invitation to a board meeting. I sank into a chair, hands trembling slightly, the adrenaline of the previous day now simmering into raw panic. My plot had worked too well. I'd humiliated Marjorie. Yes, but the cost was landing squarely on my doorstep. The bees, once instruments of poetic justice, now felt like tiny buzzing lawyers documenting my crime. I tried to rationalize. She stole my packages. I was entitled to a little artistic retaliation. But the truth was harder to spin. Marjorie had become a hurricane in pearls, and I had thrown a box of bees into the eye. Things had spiraled. Quickly, too quickly. The morning of the HOA meeting, I rehearsed my lines in the mirror. It was a harmless prank, I told my reflection. No one was hurt. It was poetic justice. But as I stepped into the community center, the rows of polished chairs and stiff smiles felt more like a courtroom than a living room. Marjorie was there, impeccably coiffed, lips pressed tight, glaring over the brim of her hat. A few neighbors gave me half smiles that were anything but comforting. "You're here to answer for your actions," the HOA president said, and I realized I wasn't facing Marjorie. I was facing the entire HOA board. Their chairs were lined like sentinels. My stomach churned. I explained carefully, dry humor tucked between the facts, trying to make it sound less like a crime and more like a story. Packages disappeared. I ordered bees. It was educational, I said, forcing a smile. A pause, a few muffled chuckles. Marjorie's glare could have frozen lava. And then something unexpected happened. The board leaned in, whispering among themselves. When they looked back at me, it wasn't fury in their eyes. It was grudging respect. One woman, who had lost a package herself months ago, gave me a small nod. "Well," she said slowly, "you certainly solved the problem creatively." Marjorie's lips thinned, but even she couldn't hide a twitch of acknowledgement. Maybe it was embarrassment. Maybe it was disbelief. Either way, the tension hung in the air like the faint hum of a distant swarm. I walked home that day with a mix of triumph and relief, realizing that justice can sting, sometimes literally, but cleverness and timing still carry weight. The packages stopped disappearing. Marjorie avoided my porch like it was radioactive. And somewhere in the chaos of the HOA, I'd become a legend, the person who dared to turn the tables. I learned something about boundaries, risk, and human stubbornness. And as I finally opened my long-awaited speaker, the one that never got stolen, I smiled. Karma, as it turns out, sometimes arrives with wings and a sting. The story ends with a quiet hum of triumph, and just a faint lingering buzz. If you felt the sting of that story, hit like, because ordinary people deserve to fight back. Subscribe to Karen's Hub so you never miss real-life moments of justice served. And tell me in the comments, how would you handle a neighbor who crosses the line?